She bought an old rusty tractor for just $1 a machine everyone else had written off as worthless junk. But hidden deep inside that rusty frame was a secret no one saw coming. What she uncovered turned out to be a $5 million revelation and a forgotten piece of American history. This is more than a restoration. It's a story of healing, legacy, and rediscovery. But before we dive in, tell us where are you watching from? We love seeing our global family in the comments. Let's get started. Down in the quiet back roads of Maple Hollow, where wildflowers brush against weathered fences and the wind carries stories older than the trees, lived a woman named Jenna. She wasn't from there, originally just a city girl once chasing deadlines and coffee breaks until life humbled her. At 41, after a painful divorce and the sudden loss of her father, Jenna packed up her life and moved into his old farmhouse, seeking something she couldn't quite name. She didn't come for peace, she came for purpose. One overcast Saturday morning, Jenna found herself at a farm auction, not looking for anything, just trying to feel something. And that's when she saw it. A battered, rust-choked tractor sitting all by itself, its tires sinking into the earth like it had given up. Taped to the cracked hood, a single dollar bill. People were chuckling, even pointing. "That thing's more rust than metal," one man joked. But Jenna, she didn't laugh. She walked right up to it, stared at it like she recognized an old friend that everyone else had forgotten. And without a word, she paid the dollar. That moment, it wasn't about the machine. It was about what it might still be hiding and who she might become by finding out. When Jenna rolled that old tractor into the barn behind her farmhouse, the tires squealed like a dying animal. The barn door groaned shut, and for a long moment, she just stood there, staring at the rusted skeleton of steel and memory. This wasn't just about fixing something. It was about proving something to herself, to a world that had told her she was too soft, too broken, too late to start again. She didn't have a plan. She didn't even know the make or model. All she had was a wrench, an old toolbox that had belonged to her father, and a quiet kind of fury. The first few days were brutal. Every bolt she touched was either frozen stiff or crumbled into powder. Her hands, more used to typing emails than gripping tools, blistered and bled. But there was a strange comfort in the pain. It made her feel alive again. Her flannel sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back in a bandana, and her boots caked in dirt. Jenna was finally beginning to look like the person she hadn't seen in years. Every layer of rust told a story. She started by pressure washing years of caked-on grime, and with every pass, the old green paint began to peek through, faded, flaking, but still clinging to its bones. Beneath the seat, she found a small nest of twigs and feathers. Some bird had once called this thing home. In a way, Jenna felt like she had, too. By the end of the first week, the front axle came free with a loud clang. As it hit the ground, a puff of red dust filled the air, and something unexpected rolled out, a tarnished metal tag, no bigger than a dog tag. She picked it up, wiped it clean on her shirt, and squinted. Bradford & Sons, custom build, unit 37, confidential. She blinked. That didn't sound like a regular farm tractor. Curiosity turned into obsession. That night, she searched the name online. Nothing. No company website, no history. She dug deeper, scanning old forums, vintage farming communities, even military surplus auctions. Somewhere on page 7 of an obscure search result, she found a thread from a 2008 collectors forum. A man had once posted about a rare line of tractors built during the Cold War, not for farming, but for transporting sensitive materials on remote government properties. Only a few were ever made. Most were believed to be scrapped, Her hands trembled as she scrolled down. Unit numbers listed. Talen and so. 4 and 2. Sword 37. She looked at the tag on her workbench and whispered, "No way." The whispers of history began to echo. In the weeks that followed, Jenna became a woman possessed. She spent her days elbow-deep in grease, and her nights buried in blueprints and declassified documents. Every screw she turned, every part she removed, revealed something more unusual, a hidden compartment beneath the dashboard, reinforced steel under the engine casing, electrical wiring that made no sense for a farm vehicle. One afternoon, while unscrewing a rusted floor panel, her wrench hit something solid, hollow, but not empty. She pried it open carefully, heart pounding, and inside was a tightly sealed metal box, small enough to fit in her lap. The latch was old, but still held. With a gentle click, it opened. Inside lay a bundle of tightly folded papers wrapped in wax cloth, along with a small velvet pouch. Her fingers shook as she opened the pouch. Gold coins, 4 of them, marked 1949. And the documents, some were technical diagrams stamped classified in bold red, others were letters handwritten, and one, at the very bottom, carried the signature of a U.S. senator from the 1950s. Jenna just sat there on the cold floor, staring. The silence in the barn pressing in around her. This wasn't just a tractor. It was a piece of American history, and it had been sitting behind someone's barn for $1. She finally understood why it had called to her. It wasn't just instinct, it was legacy. Her father had always told her, "Things are never what they seem. You gotta look deeper." Jenna. She had heard it 1,000 times growing up. She just never imagined how true it would become. But the world didn't make it easy. When she reached out to experts, many dismissed her. Some said it was fake, a hoax, or at best, a coincidence. But one man, a retired military historian named Dr. Elliot Harper, took her call seriously. He came out a week later, and the moment he saw the tractor, he froze. "I've only seen one of these, and it was in a grainy photo from 1955, he whispered. Then he saw the documents, and the coins, and Jenna saw his hands tremble. "This," he said, "could be worth millions, not just in money but in what it represents." Suddenly, everything changed. What started as a $1 gamble was now a potential $5 million discovery, if authenticated. The tractor and its contents could be auctioned, displayed in museums, or even preserved by the Smithsonian. But more than that, Jenna was no longer just a woman fixing an old machine. She was preserving a forgotten chapter of American history. By now, the old barn behind Jenna's house had become more than a workshop. It was a sanctuary. Each sunrise greeted her with quiet purpose, the dust in the air, the creak of wooden beams, and the hum of her workbench radio became the rhythm of her healing. But nothing could prepare her for what she was about to uncover next. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, just after a storm had rolled through Maple Hollow. Rain still dripped from the edge of the barn roof as Jenna returned to the tractor with a fresh cup of coffee in hand. She had spent the last 2 days restoring the undercarriage, one of the last major components untouched. As she slid beneath the frame with a flashlight, she noticed something odd behind the left rear wheel, a steel plate, bolted tightly, with no apparent function. It was flush with the chassis, so subtle it could have easily been mistaken for structural reinforcement. But Jenna had come to know this machine intimately, and this didn't belong. Curious, she grabbed her socket wrench and began working on the bolts. They were stubborn, caked in decades of grime, but eventually gave way. When she pried the plate loose, A soft thud echoed beneath her as something dropped. She rolled out quickly and shined her light. There, hidden inside a narrow cavity, was a small iron door, about the size of a shoebox lid. No handle. Just a single recessed keyhole. Her heart jumped. What kind of tractor needs a locked door? She sat back on her heels, breathing heavy. This wasn't part of any ordinary engineering. This was deliberate, meant to be hidden, meant to stay sealed. Over the next 2 days, Jenna searched every inch of the tractor for a key beneath panels, inside compartments, behind the seat, even inside the engine housing. Nothing. She stayed up late, poring through the documents she had already found, trying to decode patterns, names, any hint of where the key might be. Then it hit her. One of the letters folded in thirds, yellowed and written in a crisp military hand, mentioned something called the Mercury insert. It described a contingency protocol. In the event of breach, remove access from visual range. Integrate insert into non-functional storage to ensure confidentiality. Jenna's eyes widened. She ran outside in the dead of night, flashlight in hand, and opened the old toolbox that had come with the tractor, one she had dismissed as empty except for rusted wrenches and a screwdriver with a chipped handle. She lifted the foam lining. There, taped beneath, was a thin brass key. She held history in her palm. The next morning, with trembling hands, Jenna unlocked the iron door. It opened with a click so soft she almost didn't hear it. Inside was a tightly wrapped oilcloth. She gently pulled it out and placed it on her workbench, slowly unwrapping the layers like a surgeon revealing a long-buried truth. Beneath the cloth was a military-grade film reel canister, a sealed envelope, and a second velvet pouch heavier than the one before. She opened the pouch first. Inside were 2 platinum coins, perfectly preserved, dated 1948, each bearing the stamp of the U.S. Mint, and an engraving she'd never seen before, a falcon perched atop a globe, surrounded by stars. She whispered, "What is this?" but no one was there to answer. The contents of the envelope would change everything. She unfolded the paper slowly, revealing an official memorandum, dated March 12, 1950, stamped Top Secret Eyes Only, signed by a name she recognized from history books. It detailed an experimental transportation unit used to relocate classified materials during the early stages of nuclear development. The letter referenced Prototype Unit 0037, Jenna's tractor, as being part of a covert operation involving the storage and protection of rare elements. One sentence, in particular, sent chills down her spine. In the event of sabotage or exposure, the unit is equipped with a decoy vehicle integrated with critical artifacts and contingency bonds to be transferred through military inheritance protocol. Contingency bonds, artifacts, inheritance protocol. This was no ordinary vehicle. It was a vault on wheels, disguised as a farm tool, abandoned before its true function was ever fulfilled. But the final clue was in the film reel. With Dr. Harper's help, Jenna had the reel digitized by a preservation specialist at a local university. The footage, grainy, black and white, showed soldiers in full uniform operating a vehicle identical to hers across a desert landscape. It bore the same serial number. In one frame, a military officer stood beside it, saluting before it was loaded into a rail car marked for Washington, D.C. The last scene zoomed in on the front emblem, the exact one now gleaming under Jenna's careful restoration. It was undeniable. Jenna's tractor had once been part of a hidden chapter in Cold War history. Its contents, now verified by historians and artifact evaluators, were worth an estimated $5.2 million, not just because of the coins or the memorabilia, but because of its rarity, secrecy, and historical importance. But for Jenna, it was never about the money. As she stood in the barn, surrounded by blueprints, bolts, and dusty memories, she thought about her father, about the long nights he'd spent building machines from scratch, about the way he had taught her to fix instead of throw away, to wonder instead of walk past. She thought about how she'd come to Maple Hollow with nothing but grief and a broken heart, and how, in a twist no one could have predicted, she had uncovered a legacy worth more than any inheritance. The world finally saw what she saw all along. No one laughed anymore. The news outlets came. The museums called. Offers were made. But Jenna didn't rush to decide. She spent her days finishing the restoration, not for profit, but for peace, for closure. And every time she touched the steel or turned a bolt, she whispered, "Thank you." Not just to the machine, but to herself, for daring to believe. The day the appraisal report arrived, Jenna didn't open it right away. It sat on her kitchen table, unopened, while the coffee grew cold in her cup. Outside, the late autumn wind rattled the bare branches of the trees, and the barn stood in still silence, as if waiting for her next move. She had uncovered something extraordinary. No one questioned that now. Historians validated the documents, experts authenticated the coins, and media crews requested interviews. The $5.2 million estimate had already made its way into the headlines. But none of that explained the weight in Jenna's chest. It wasn't fear, it wasn't pride, it was something more complicated. Because somewhere in the middle of rust and revelation, her world had shifted not just around her, but within her. She had come to Maple Hollow to disappear. Now, people knew her name in places she'd never even heard of. And that terrified her. Jenna had once been the kind of woman who never took center stage. She preferred the background, the quiet corners of life. She used to apologize before offering an idea, second-guess herself before speaking out. But now, when she looked in the mirror, she saw a different version of herself, not louder, not bolder, but clearer. As if the layers of rust she'd chipped away from the tractor had, piece by piece, stripped away her own doubts too. She no longer asked, "Who am I to do this?" She started asking, "Who am I not to?" It wasn't just a machine. It was a mirror. Every late night spent under flickering barn lights. Every moment of doubt when the engine wouldn't budge. Every time she cut her hand and didn't stop. They weren't about fixing something. They were about becoming someone. One afternoon, weeks after the hidden chamber discovery, a local school invited Jenna to speak. The principal told her, "Your story has inspired our students. They need to see what perseverance really looks like." She laughed nervously and said she wasn't a speaker. But she went, standing in front of a room full of 14-year-olds with wide eyes and too much screen time. She told them the truth, not just about the coins or the secret vault, but about waking up feeling lost, about crying on the floor of her father's old kitchen when the loneliness got too loud, about the first time she turned the wrench and felt a spark she hadn't felt in years. She ended with one simple sentence. "You don't have to be whole to start. You just have to start, and the rest will find you." They gave her a standing ovation, and something shifted in her again. She wasn't the same Jenna who walked into that auction, not the woman who bought the tractor, not the woman who opened the secret compartment. She had grown into someone who saw value where others saw scrap, someone who honored the past without letting it define her, someone who truly believed that, sometimes, the universe speaks in rust and silence and forgotten machines. The offers poured in. Collectors, government agencies. One museum in D.C. offered her a small fortune just to lease the tractor for a year. She read every proposal but signed none of them. Not yet. She still visited the barn every morning. Still wiped down the metal with her calloused hands. Still listened to the silence between the wind and the wood, where she swore she could hear her father's voice sometimes. And she thought about the real treasure she'd found. Not the coins, not the documents, but the reason to get up, the joy in rediscovery, the pride in doing something no one else believed in. Then came the letter. Handwritten, no return address. The penmanship was shaky but elegant. Dear Ms. Jenna. My name is Eleanor. I'm 83 years old. My father worked at Bradford & Sons in 1949. He once told me a story about a project so secret, he couldn't even tell my mother. Before he died, he gave me a photograph of a tractor. It looks exactly like the one you restored. I never knew what it meant until I saw you on the news. Thank you for bringing my father's work back into the light. Sincerely, Eleanor D. Jenna read the letter over and over again, tears wetting the edges. This was why it had to be her. Because only someone who had known loss, who had felt forgotten, who had been discarded like scrap metal, would understand what it meant to be found again. That night, she didn't go inside right away. She sat on the porch, wrapped in an old quilt, watching the stars wink above the barn roof. The tractor rested silently in the dark, like a loyal friend that had been waiting for decades to finally tell its story. And Jenna whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." Not because she thought she was special, but because she now knew she was ready. By the time the first snow touched the ground in Maple Hollow, Jenna's story had traveled far beyond the town lines. It was no longer just a local legend murmured between neighbors over coffee and pie. Her name and her tractor had appeared on national news, in podcasts, in late-night talk shows. She was the woman who found $5 million in a pile of rust. But to Jenna, that headline had always missed the point. It wasn't about what she found. It was about why she found it. And what she chose to do next would show the world who she truly was. Opportunity, as it turned out, came knocking hard. The offers were surreal. A tech billionaire wanted to buy the entire tractor. Documents and contents he offered $6.3 million on the spot. A historical preservation foundation offered her a role as a heritage ambassador to travel and speak about her discovery. A museum in Chicago offered to fly in the entire machine via helicopter for a Cold War exhibit. But Jenna didn't rush. She brewed coffee in the same dented old kettle every morning, fed the birds, walked down to the barn, ran her fingers across the worn seat, and whispered good morning to the past. And every day, she asked herself the same question. What's the right way to honor this story? Because the truth was, the tractor didn't just belong to her. It belonged to history. It belonged to Eleanor's father. It belonged to all the people who had once built, protected, and forgotten it. And it belonged to every soul who'd ever been told they weren't enough only to later discover their true value. Then came the call that changed everything. It was from the Midwest Heritage Museum, a small but fiercely respected institution that specialized in overlooked American artifacts. They didn't offer the most money. In fact, their budget was modest. But their director, a woman named Dr. Lillian Hayes, spoke with a reverence that struck Jenna like a chord. "We don't just want to display the tractor," she said softly. "We want to tell your story alongside it. Not just what you found, but who you became in the process." That was it. That was the why. Jenna agreed, but on one condition. She wanted the restoration process, the documents, the hidden vault, everything to be displayed exactly as she discovered it. No polishing away the truth, no glamorizing the dust, no rewriting the letters to fit someone else's narrative. "I didn't find this with gloves on and a clipboard," she told them. "I found it with a busted wrench and a broken heart." "Keep that in." They agreed. Preparation began almost immediately. The museum sent a full team to Maple Hollow. For 2 weeks, they lived in town, documenting every detail. Historians cataloged each document. Engineers sketched the mechanical design of the secret compartment, and videographers recorded Jenna's interviews raw, emotional, and unfiltered. At one point, while filming, the crew asked her, "Do you feel lucky this happened to you?" She paused, looked at the camera, then said, "I don't feel lucky. I feel trusted, and I won't break that trust." Then came opening day. It was the largest crowd the Midwest Heritage Museum had ever seen. News vans lined the street, elderly veterans in uniform, school kids holding handmade thank you signs. Even Eleanor D., the daughter of the man who once helped build the tractor, made the journey from 2 states away. Jenna didn't wear makeup. She wore boots and a barn jacket and pinned her father's old pocket watch to her collar. As the curtain dropped and the exhibit lights warmed the steel of the restored tractor, gasps filled the room. But what moved people most wasn't the machine. It was the letter beside it. Jenna's letter, typed simply, signed by hand. This machine was forgotten. So was I. Until one day, we found each other. And in fixing it, I learned how to fix parts of myself, too. If you're reading this, maybe there's something in your life that feels broken. I want you to know, rust is not the end. It's just the beginning of a new story. From farm dust to spotlight, Jenna had stepped into a new chapter. She began receiving speaking invitations not because she had a $1 million story, but because she had a human story. She started a small project in Maple Hollow called the Rust Revival, a local workshop where people could bring old tools, farm equipment, and even furniture to restore with their own hands. Veterans came, teens came, widows came, and every person walked away with more than a fixed object. They walked away with hope. Jenna didn't become famous. She became meaningful. And she never sold the coins. They stayed in the vault, hidden inside the tractor, right where she found them because, to her, they were no longer currency. They were anchors to something real. A story of patience, of grief transformed, of value revealed when no one was looking. There are moments in life when the noise fades, when you realize the world doesn't change in explosions but in quiet choices, in slow mornings, in the ache of memory. For Jenna, that moment came one crisp December evening when the barn lights flickered softly against the snow outside, and the radio hummed an old country tune her father used to whistle. She was alone, yet felt surrounded, not by people but by the past, by stories, by purpose. She sat in the tractor seat, not as a restorer, not as a woman who'd found a fortune, but simply as a daughter. Clutched in her hand was a letter, one she had written, but never sent. To him. Dear Dad, I didn't think I'd ever pick up your tools again. I didn't think I had it in me. But the truth is, I hear you every time I turn a bolt. I feel you in the way the steel resists me, and the way it finally gives. You taught me how to fix broken things. But you never told me the hardest thing I'd ever have to fix would be myself. Her eyes blurred as she read the words out loud to the empty barn. Her voice cracked, her breath caught. And then she cried, not because she was sad, but because for the first time in years, she wasn't. The woman who once hid from her own reflection was now teaching others how to see their worth. Her Rust Revival workshop had grown. It was no longer just about restoring machines. It was about restoring people. Folks from as far as 3 counties away would show up with rusted heirlooms, hoping to bring a piece of their past back to life. One day, a young woman named Claire came in, holding a dented metal lunchbox. My granddad used this every day when he worked the railroad, Claire said, her voice trembling. He passed last spring. I can't bring myself to throw it away. Jenna took the box gently, turned it over, and smiled. "Let's bring him back," she whispered. For 3 hours, they worked side by side, sanding, cleaning, listening. Claire shared stories of summer afternoons on her grandfather's porch, of his laugh, of how he smelled like sawdust and cinnamon. When they finished, the lunchbox gleamed, not perfect but alive. Claire hugged it to her chest and burst into tears. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." It happened again and again. A veteran brought in his father's dog tags. A widower came with his wife's old rocking chair. A boy brought his grandfather's broken harmonica. And Jenna became more than a restorer. She became a keeper of stories. But the story that shook her to her core came one icy January night. She had just locked up the barn when a knock sounded at her front door. Standing there was a frail man in his late 80s, bundled in a wool coat, eyes glassy with age. "Are you Jenna?" "I am," she said softly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a faded black and white photograph. It was the tractor, not hers, but one just like it. "That was mine," he whispered. "Unit the 141, Bradford and Sons. I drove it in 1951. We weren't allowed to talk about it, not even to our wives." Jenna's hands covered her mouth. He continued, voice trembling. "I never thought I'd see one again. When I saw your story on the news, I cried, for the first time in decades, because someone remembered." She led him to the barn without a word. When the lights came on, and the restored tractor stood before him, he reached out a shaking hand and touched the hood, and then he fell to his knees. Not in weakness, but in reverence. He looked up at her, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. "Thank you for bringing me home." That night, Jenna sat by the fire, her mind racing not with facts or headlines, but with something deeper. This wasn't about legacy. It was about healing. For her, for others, for the forgotten. She had spent so many years believing she wasn't enough. Too soft, too quiet, too broken. But now, people drove for hours just to sit with her in silence, to sand down wood, to clean brass, to cry without apology. And all because one woman, one wrench, and $1 had dared to believe. There's more to this story. The morning of the museum's dedication ceremony was unusually still. No bird song, no wind, just a quiet calm, like the world was holding its breath. Jenna stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, staring at her reflection flannel shirt, jeans, boots scuffed with years of wear. She thought about wearing something more formal, something fitting for the woman who had unearthed a $5 million secret. But that version of her never felt real. She tied her hair back with her father's bandana, the same one he wore every summer working in the field, and whispered, "You were right, Dad. Broken things still have value." She grabbed her coat and walked outside. Snow crunched under her feet. A few flakes floated gently through the sky like soft reminders from above. The barn, as always, stood waiting, and inside, the tractor gleamed not in polish, but in presence. It no longer looked forgotten. It looked respected. The final journey began. A flatbed trailer arrived to carry the tractor to the Midwest Heritage Museum, where it would become the centerpiece of a permanent Cold War exhibit titled "Beneath the Rust Stories Never Told." Jenna didn't cry when they loaded it. She cried when they left the barn empty. It wasn't about the machine. It was about what it had brought her through. It had listened to her grief, held her healing, and now it would carry her story into the hearts of strangers who needed to believe again. The crowd at the museum was overwhelming. Hundreds filled the room, veterans, schoolchildren, mechanics, journalists, Even survivors of the Cold War era who had come just to stand near something that proved the past still had breath in it. Dr. Lillian Hayes, the museum director, took the stage. Her voice echoed gently through the hall. Today, we don't just unveil a restored artifact. We unveil the journey of a woman who reminded the world that forgotten things still have stories, that silence doesn't mean insignificance, that sometimes the quietest voices echo the loudest truths. Then she called Jenna to the stage. Jenna stood before them, not polished, but powerful. She didn't speak like a professional. She spoke like someone who had lived every word. I didn't grow up thinking I'd ever do something worth remembering. I wasn't the smartest, or the loudest, or the most confident. But I learned something when I pulled that tractor out of the mud. I learned that you don't have to be whole to be worthy. You don't need a perfect plan to start something meaningful. You just need a reason, and a little bit of rust. The room fell silent. Even the air seemed to listen. After the ceremony, people lined up not just to see the tractor, but to meet Jenna. A little boy tugged on her sleeve and handed her a drawing, a picture of the tractor, with her standing beside it like a superhero. She knelt down and smiled, blinking back tears. "Why'd you draw me like that?" she asked. He shrugged. "Because you fixed something everybody else gave up on." That night, Jenna stood alone in the exhibit. The lights had dimmed, the crowd was gone, but the presence in the room lingered. She ran her fingers along the hood one last time, and as she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A note, left by a visitor, folded neatly and placed beside the wheel. She opened it slowly. "Thank you for reminding me that my story isn't over. I've been sitting in silence for years, thinking no one would care. But you've shown me that sometimes. All it takes is one person to listen. You were that person for me." Her breath caught in her throat. She folded the letter, placed it in her pocket, and smiled through tears. In fixing the tractor, Jenna had fixed so much more. She restored the story of a secret Cold War relic. She honored the life and work of a forgotten generation. She inspired strangers to believe in their own second chances. And most of all, she learned to believe in herself again. Back in Maple Hollow, the barn is still standing. But now, there's something new inside a long workbench, lined with tools, wood shavings, and half-repaired memories. A sign hangs above it, carved by hand. It reads, "Not broken, just waiting." And every time someone walks through those doors holding a rusted piece of their past, they see the woman who once paid a single dollar for a forgotten tractor and gave the world something priceless in return. As the snow settled quietly over Maple Hollow, Jenna Walker lit the last lantern in her old barn, not to begin another restoration, but to hang a sign above the workbench for the next soul who wandered in lost and searching. This time, they'd hear something different. They'd hear, "You're not broken. You're just waiting." She knew now the second chance she gave that forgotten tractor wasn't just about steel and bolts. It was about giving voice to the overlooked, light to the unseen, and hope to anyone who's ever been told you're too late. The woman once laughed at for paying $1 for a pile of rust had become the guide who helped others find their way back to worth. Because for Jenna and for all who come after restoration isn't the end. It's where the real story begins. The end. Up next, 2 more stories that will lift your heart. Click to keep watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe even the forgotten deserve to be found again.